Yay. Okay. How's everyone doing? All right, let's see. Oh, there we go. Perfect. All right. Awesome. Well, great to meet everyone. My name's Trevor. Christy, thanks so much for the introduction, and to Hannah and Rachel for the opportunity to come to talk to you all today about a very buzzy topic. Show of hands, how many of y'all have had a session on AI in the last couple of years? There we go. I'd imagine it's top of mind. First thing we'll do is I like to get a bit of a gut check on where people are at. If you want to quickly scan that QR code, it'll take you to a little survey, and I want to see where people are thinking with AI and how that experience has been going so far. So just show me a thumbs up when you've got that ready. Yep. All right, so how does AI make you feel? Let's see what pops up here. Excited? Ooh, okay. There's a lot of energy at night. I love it. Okay. Scared, helped, worried, anxious and excited. Nice. So quite a range. Some folks are feeling really excited and I'm ready to go. Some people are saying, why is this a topic and I want it, a million miles away from me. I did a survey at WEC to over 100 planners on how they were feeling about AI, and some of the things that really stood out to me was the majority struggle with AI adoption because of training and understanding how to use it. So if your company or organization has an AI policy, you have access to Copilot, and they say, you can't do this, 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 and this, well, we're not going to tell you what you can do. And if that sounds familiar, that's what I was hearing when I did it at WEC. So what I want to talk about today is really show you this timeline of AI and where you can actually start to adopt it in your day-to-day. If you're overwhelmed, that's not a bad thing. If you look at how fast the AI adoption curve has gone in terms of the technology, it went from this quirky little tool back in 2022 that said, hey, draft an email to my mom saying I can't make dinner tonight, all the way to agents that are automating things between different tools. We've seen event-specific tools like Spark AI pop up, and things that have really changed the way that your workflow can operate. But this has all happened in less than 2 years. So if you think about the adoption of other tools like the internet or other products that have really changed the way we work, this is not a lot of time to be able to understand how to use such an important tool. So what we're going to skip today, before I jump into the agenda, is some hot topics: data privacy and AI, ethical considerations, AI agents, will it steal my job? These are all very valid questions. If you want to talk with me afterwards about it, happy to chat on it. But just given the limited amount of time, we're not going to talk about that today. What we are going to cover is a bunch of different areas. So AI landscape, we're going to talk about how to make sense of all the AI tools that are out there. We're going to talk about how to actually work with AI. So what are the types of use cases you can use for AI tools? Comparing the big tools. So I've talked to folks that say, oh, I'm on ChatGPT, but I wish I had access to Copilot. We'll give you a run through of what those different tools are, how you can access them, and how to think about that spectrum of AI adoption. It's not choosing one tool or another. It's actually building that foundational knowledge. We'll also do a live demo. So I'll actually walk you through a demo of ChatGPT with an actual event planning workflow that we built. And I'll give you a checklist that you can run with when you get back to work on Monday of how you can actually implement this with your team. And if you're frantically taking notes of any of my slides, I have a PDF guide that you can download at the end that will have everything that I'm talking about today and much more. It was around 45 pages when I did it at WEC. It's now about 80. So you can have a nice thick booklet and take back to your team and say, look at all the stuff that MPI Virginia gave me and sign me up next year, bring everyone else. So who am I? As Christy mentioned, my name's Trevor. I'm a marketer, an entrepreneur, and now an event planner. I've built numerous companies, currently running an event planning agency and an event technology solution called Crystal, and I'm also building a project management tool for event professionals using AI. So that's kind of my experience. I've been in tech for the last 10 years, but this is where I'm coming and trying to bring that perspective into event planning and the event industry to help you out with some of this adoption. So how should you view AI? Now, this is overwhelming. The first time I tried to find a landscape of all the tools that are out there for AI. and what you could possibly work with. And this one on the left is actually only AI tools specifically for research and market. So there's dozens of tools just for research and market. So if you're thinking about AI in terms of who can adopt tools the fastest? Hey, I have this tool that can do image creation and this one that can do something different, but specifically in my industry. Don't get overwhelmed by the number of tools that are out there. There are a bunch of different tools that you can use for all these different vertical use cases, but you want to think about AI adoption from a foundational perspective. So ChatGPT, Copilot, Claude, Google Gemini. How can I replicate some of the workflows I want to do in these tools first? How far can I take it? Then start to look at what are other tools that can make this easier. The big takeaway I want to have from this section is workflows. How can I integrate this into my workflow, and where can tools help me with that? So everyone, you've probably seen note takers pop up in your Teams or Zoom meetings telling you, can you record this and give me a transcript? Microsoft Teams has transcription. You can take that and put it into Copilot, ChatGPT, and actually see some of the initial results. If then you say, well, actually, I want to log this all in Salesforce or HubSpot or one of my CRM systems, maybe you want to look at a tool like Fireflies that's $30 a month. And then if you want to say, well, I have numerous folks on different meetings, I want to start analyzing it across different meetings, you have tools like Nooks that can really get you to another level. So if you see all these tools, don't get overwhelmed by which tool do I have to choose. Try to focus on how can I actually build this workflow in the base tool that I likely already have access to. Give it your context and your expertise. Go back and forth, try to understand how you can use it. And then when you start bumping up against that, oh, I wish it could be easier in this workflow or more integrated, that's when you can start looking at other tools. But you already have that foundational AI understanding to be able to take that on. How many of y'all have heard of Zapier? Show of hands. A couple people. So I talked to an event professional recently who said, Trevor, like I have this email flow that I'm thinking about. People email me and I want to have it as qualified, and I want it to auto log it in my CRM system and filter it accordingly. And I said, oh, like that sounds a lot like automation. Have you heard of Zapier? And then they said, well, which AI tool is Zapier? AI is not automation. Automation has been around for 10 or more years. When you think about activities you want to do with automation, that's like an if this, then that, right? So if someone sends me an email that has the subject line demo, then I want you to do this in my CRM system. I want you to send me a Teams message. That's automation. A workflow like this, you can do in a tool like Zapier without AI. So if your team is concerned about, well, AI adoption, how can I make ourselves more efficient? Look at areas like automation first and ask yourself, how much of my workflow can I make easier with something like Zapier or automation before I start throwing it into the AI engine and saying, how can it make my job differently? So I wanted to clarify that because I know that was a hot topic that I've talked about before of just how that kind of flags in. But there's an example here with automation and Zapier. At WEC, I gave an introduction of Meet Your New Intern AI, and I really feel like this kind of concept strikes a node for people. This is me 10 years ago at ExpoSoft Solutions. As my first job, I was an intern. You can see, sharp and ready to work. Dharmesh Shah, who's the founder of Simple AI, has a great quote that says, think of AI as someone that has a PhD in everything, but doesn't know where the coffee machine is. And I love that quote because it was like me, right? I showed up and I said, I'm so excited to learn. I want to do everything. I'd never been on a demo. I didn't know how to send an email. Like I'm excited. Give me work. Show me what to do. So when you think about AI and working with any of these tools, think about it like an eager intern, someone who wants to learn from you, right? You have so much knowledge in your head. How can you show AI how you think and what you go through? It works way faster than I did at that point, right? It has access to the internet. It's able to have specific expertise in all these different areas. But you don't want to look at it as this transactional, I give you this, you gave me that, and I hate it. It's bad. You want to think about it like an intern. Because if my boss yelled at me the first day as, hey, this is terrible, I would have probably gone home and cried and not got into any of these type of experiences. But instead, he told me, hey, this is great. Here's how to get better next time. Or, hey, what if I gave you a template from how I did this last time, and now you can actually think about how to do it again. When you think about it like an intern, it really can reframe your relationship with AI tools, and you almost get curious, right? You start looking at it, it's like, oh, you did this, but oh, if it was this could be a little bit better. How can I help you get better? And that's the theme that I'll throw out today around AI as an intern and how to think about it. Use cases for AI. I get this question a lot. Where can I use it? I'd say about 90% of the use cases that I hear when I'm talking to event professionals is transactional. Like I mentioned, give me this, I want that. It's going to be right or it's going to be wrong. Really, there's a spectrum of AI in terms of how you can use it. There's transactional, so write me an email with this type of information. But I found the biggest benefit is a thought partner. This is, again, where I see it going as an intern, it's like more of an experienced employee. When I actually share with an AI tool, here's how I'm thinking, here's how I want to tackle this problem, here's my concerns, can you help me navigate this? I'm so impressed by how much it can actually spar with me and help me to actually understand some of these topics better, opposed to saying, hey, that email didn't sound cool enough, add a James Bond reference, and it'll be more interesting. And the last one, I mentioned it's not automation. You can use AI with automation, right? So you can use ways to actually automate numerous of your workflows. I spoke with someone yesterday at the reception who was excited about agents and how you can make all these different things happen. That is the advanced level of AI. That shouldn't scare you. It's something you can definitely get into, but it's not necessarily where you have to start. So first off, with transactional uses, so I'll give some examples here. Give me the outputs is the way that I like to frame this. Clear right, clear wrong. Examples like writing, researching, analysis, categorizing, summarizing. These are all ways you can use AI for transactional use cases. And again, this will all be in the guide, so snap photos if you want, but I'll make sure you gets to you. And then I've highlighted a couple areas here. Oh, there we go. In blue of the overlap. So there are tasks that aren't just for transactional use cases. You can use them in the whole spectrum. So an example is, maybe when you're researching, right, and I'm trying to look at venues or something with my role, and I start to see some contradictions, like, oh, it's saying that there's two locations that have very similar information or like opportunities for us. How can I help to unpack that? That's where using AI, again, help me think better, can be really powerful. So trying to say, well, this is what I understand, here are my assumptions, can you challenge me on this? That's where it can be pretty interesting. But also ways like decision support. I've used this in use cases of, in my event planning world, here's my client, here's the vendor, here's a bit about them, right? Here's how they think, here's the kind of archetype, how they operate. I need to help navigate this conflict. Can you give me some ideas on how to do it? And here's what I'm thinking. That type of use case is not how people think about AI, right? You don't think about it as someone who's like a manager that can help you to actually unpack conflict and think about, how people might operate. But that's a really great use case. That's more like that thought partner hat. And the last one I say is automation. And really that's do this for me, but on a schedule. So if you have transactional use cases, and we'll go through one today, hey, it comes in, I get an RFP, I need to analyze it, then I need to go and create a quote around it, and I need to email it to my other reps on my team. If you have enough of a dialed in workflow, you can definitely look at automation and ways to kind of include that. But again, I encourage you, don't jump into the agents and all this stuff as your first step. Try to understand how you can use AI with your default tools well, and then start to explore those other workflows. And I gave some examples here of how you can actually combine your skills. So if you're looking at writing, researching, summarizing, here are ways that it actually spans the gambit, right? It can be transactional, it can be a thought partner, you can use it with automation. So really, think outside the box when you're looking at this. Don't look at it just in transactional. Try to think about it in terms of this spectrum of thought partner, automation, and transactional, and how you can kind of level up your understanding around that. So the golden question, and I mentioned this in the guide, you have Ford or Ferrari, you have Mac or Windows. Big questions, right? Which AI tool should I use? There's some big players, and when I talk about that base level, tool, almost every organization will have access to one of those. How many of y'all have used one of these tools? Just as a show of hands. So this is kind of your baseline. Like these are the tools that I like to think of them as horizontal AI tools. You can use them in a bunch of different contexts. They're not specific to a certain area or industry or image creation, marketing. You can use it for everything. But there's a question of like, well, how do I actually evaluate these and pick which one to use? And the way that I've kind of simplified this is think about it in terms of existing products, new products, and very specific vertical products. So existing products. The pros of using a tool like Microsoft Copilot or Google Gemini is that almost all of your, if not all of your organizations, likely use Microsoft or Google, right? You have your email, you have your OneDrive, these tools are already part of your system. So even though the security challenges of how much more secure is this than other like tools like ChatGPT or Claude may not be as material, when you talk to your IT department or your leadership, they trust these tools, right? I've a reference in the guide, Casper Studios, they're an AI product builder, a good friend of mine. Their team comes from companies like Accenture and LinkedIn. And they were saying that this is the main problem, is that when they talk to C-suite executives, it's the perception, right? How often in event planning in the industry do we see perception actually overtake the material impact? So you have to think about this in terms of the pros. If you want to use a tool like this, it might be easier to get adoption because of the fact that your company's already using this. So it's not like you're bringing in a new tool to the area. The other thing is integration. I talked about workflows, and if you look at Copilot or Gemini and you use Google or Microsoft, it's very well integrated into your system, right? So if you use it with I have an example here with Outlook, right? It's kind of embedded in all your different areas. It's embedded into Excel. It's embedded into PowerPoint. That's a benefit of using tools that are native to this ecosystem that you already work in. So I think those are probably the biggest two, areas that I would say these products win at. Now, at the same time, Microsoft and Google have millions of customers. They have so many apps and products and suites. One of the challenges is that they can be a little bit slower. And I showed a timeline in the guide of some of the products that ChatGPT and Claude have released that took a little bit longer or haven't been released yet by players like Microsoft and Google. So it's definitely a challenge, is that if you're the person who's like, I like to try the newest tool as soon as it pops out, that might be a drawback of using one of the existing tools. And the other thing is, and I really want to emphasize this, it's dependent on your organization's data settings and policies. How many of your companies, organizations have an AI policy? Show of hands. All right, seeing a couple come up. So that's one of the biggest blockers that I've seen to adoption when I was doing this at WEC, is that organizations will say, well, because we don't have a good policy on how you can use data, then we don't want you to use AI, altogether. If you use a product like Copilot, so when you're creating a document in Microsoft and you say the settings, anyone with this link can view, right? Anyone in organization. A lot of companies have not customized that. So your C-suite will create a document that says, here is everybody's salary for the company in an Excel document. They won't change the setting. So when an intern like me comes along and then does a Copilot query and says, hey, I want to figure out the salaries of the company, Copilot says, well, you have access to this document. Let me go show you the salary of your CEO. That's not an AI problem. That's not an issue with the product. That's an issue with your data security and settings. So when you think about this challenge of AI policy, start to maybe ask some of these questions to your team and make sure that's coming up. Because it might not actually be an issue with AI. It might be an issue that your company doesn't have the best data organization and hierarchy hygiene. And if you fix that or help them work through it, you can start to create better systems to use AI in your product. So that's example of the existing product kind of build out. Now, with new products, so ChatGPT, Claude, these ones pop up. The big benefits of these, they are slightly more affordable in numerous cases. And they're also much faster releasing. So if you've seen custom GPTs or all these new products that come out from ChatGPT, that's an example of them being fast to launch products. And the benefit to that is because they don't have this behemoth of an ecosystem like Microsoft or Google do. They have their own product and they're able to launch things a lot faster. So again, I mentioned if you're someone who says, this is a new tool, I want to see this tool, I want to see how it can work with my workflow, you might want to look at some of these products like ChatGPT or Claude as your starting point, because they're unlocking all these different opportunities for you to do that. And I've also found that they're more accessible integrations. So as much as products like Google and Microsoft are well integrated in their ecosystem, when you want to connect to Asana or Notion or any of the other tools that are out there, I found that ChatGPT and Claude, their integrations are quite robust. They can help you to plug into a bunch of different tools. So if your workflows start to go outside of those Google and Microsoft ecosystems, a benefit I've seen with these products is that they're a bit more flexible in terms of being able to connect those kind of workflows together. The challenge, as I mentioned before, with cons, the jump for data security is harder, right? If you're bringing this tool to your organization, I spoke to folks that said our policy is you can't upload any data to AI. You're okay with using it to ask questions and do research. You can't upload any type of data, even if you anonymize it, it's not allowed. That's an example of the data security jump, right? Can be quite challenging with these kind of products, whereas with other ones, it's not as big of a deal. And the other thing I would say, again, not as natively integrated with Google or Microsoft as you might get with Copilot or Gemini. So one-to-one comparison between those two, just to kind of give a bit of context. That's how I would like to think about those comparisons. You are not disadvantaged if you have access to Copilot and you don't have access to ChatGPT. You can still learn how to use AI. You can still build those workflows. You can still adopt those additional tools if you need to. But it's that baseline is definitely there. How many of y'all have heard of Spark? Spark AI. Has that come up at all? Show of hands. A little bit. So this is an event-specific AI product. So it was made specifically for event planners, and it was launched, I believe it was in 2023. And I wanted to quickly run through it as an example product. If you want, I think it's sparkit.com to check it out. The benefits of these tools, and you'll see some tools that don't have that typical chat interface. Instead, they tell you, well, give me the number of attendees you have. Tell me what type of conference you have. Tell me, what type of responsibilities you have. And then I'll build your event timeline. You don't have to know how to prompt. You can just put the information in and get the output. That's tools like Spark are very much like that. Now, the benefit to those tools are that you don't need to be as good at prompting because you have this nice, clean, experience that you can work with to kind of get what you're looking to do. And it has event-specific context. I don't want to underplay that, that whenever someone builds a tool specifically for the event industry, and they're event planners and officials themselves, they likely have a lot more experience with the industry than a tool that you're trying to DIY, in a different solution. So I've actually been quite impressed. I put this in the guide. I tried to get Spark to create an event timeline for a conference we were doing. And I was pretty impressed with how detailed it was. It covered all the areas we needed to hit. It was pretty good. So I think if you're curious about seeing the power of AI within events, and maybe you're not ready yet to start trying some of the prompts and doing that, I would encourage you to check out some of these event-specific ones because there's an aha moment, right? For all of us that are working, in the event space, you see that when you show your client something that really blows their mind, it's like, wow, I didn't know that was possible. That gets them excited. This is an example of if you want to see what's possible with some of these products, Spark might be a good opportunity. The cons to these types of products, and this is a hot take, so please take it with a grain of salt, is that they're harder to customize because they give you the interface, right? So because they're not having this open chat where you can customize the input and iterate on it and give it instructions, you're just working with, here's the things you input and here's what you see. It's not like you can customize a lot of that to your own workflow. An example here is with our event timelines, right? How many event planners do you have in the room? Show of hands. A handful, okay. When you create a critical path, right, or a work back plan with your clients, one of the things for us at our company is that we like to have a person who's most responsible. So we don't just want to say, this is the deadline to submit the BEO to the food and beverage company. I want to say Trevor's responsible for that. I couldn't figure out how to do that very easily in a tool like this, but in ChatGPT, Copilot, et cetera, you can customize it to say, well, here's my team. That's the example I gave in the PDF. Here's my team, Trevor, Judy, Layla, here's what we all handle. Here's our responsibilities. Create your timeline, but also break it up. Tell us who's responsible for what. That's the type of customization that I found it pretty hard to get in some of these default tools, as much as they're powerful for those specific kind of use cases. And the other thing, and this is, if you use AI, if you're curious about it and you start to use it more and more, the black box that is AI can be very frustrating, right? You put a prompt in, you've put it together. The next time you do it, it doesn't give you the exact same output you're expecting. And that's something where with these types of tools like Spark, I found frustrating because I don't have control on how it's working with the input and what the output looks like. So the same thing with customization. For me, it's a bit of a black box. And I find that challenging to try to understand if I'm doing this day in, day out, how do I keep getting the result that I'm looking for and not just have it be, a guessing game of well, I hope that it actually gets it right this time. So some of the context, again, I would encourage you to check it out if you haven't already. It's a cool tool, but just to give some context to some of the vertical specific stuff here. At the end of the day, 80% of your results that you get from any of these tools is based on how you prompt it. I mentioned in this guide as well, the engineer that I worked with at Casper, he's was an AI engineer at Accenture and working with Fortune 100 companies. I asked him, I said, I'm Max, I'm frustrated. I love Claude, but I want to use ChatGPT. But then my friend's using Copilot, and I'm kind of feeling like I'm in between. He told me, he said, with the companies we work with, the reason why we have to decide which model we're using is two things. One is we're running this task a million times, right? If you're thinking about a product that uses AI that you're using every day, it's running that type of task a million times. If there's a 1% deviation in the output, and that's magnified, that makes it so much harder for them to actually get the result they want. So he said, if you're using it on your day-to-day, I don't run a million prompts ever, that's not something you should be concerned about. And the other thing that he said that matters about the models is tokens, right? Tokens is how much cost is it to actually run this prompt. again, when you're running 1,000,000 prompts, that's a big deal of like, does Gemini do it faster than Copilot, or like what's the differences? If you're doing it in your organization, that's not a major difference for you, right? You have to learn, if you can learn how to get better at prompting and how to use some of these tools, you'll get a much better result regardless of what platform you're using. So keep this in mind, and don't feel too much inertia on promo. I wish I had this product. Keep in mind, just get good at prompting. What is prompting, right? If you've used any of these tools, you'll see there's a very classic interface that has a chat, right? You can input information, you can upload files, you get back to it. The prompt is what you put in that chat. And what I'll talk you through today is how you can actually structure this. Now, I tried to alter it to make it into a fun little acronym. I call it RHYME. So it's role, information, mission, and expectations. I've seen persona, context, task, constraint. Like it doesn't matter exactly what you call it as long as you structure it the way you're supposed to. The first one is the role. So one of the things that is very impressive about AI, and I've made this mistake when I first started using it, you have to tell it what its role or job is within your organization, the task you're trying to do. The example I shared in the guide is when I was trying to book a flight and figure out what time should I get to the airport. And I got upgrade. Okay, well, I'm on business class now. Great. Okay. What time should I get to the airport? And I just asked it straight up, what time should I get to the airport? When I didn't include the role, and I just said, can you give me some context? And I gave it all the input. It said, oh yeah, 3 hours before, standard for anything. And I said, but shouldn't I have priority? Don't I get in fast? Like, is this not? When I changed it and I said, hey, you are a travel agent. Your customer has been upgraded to business class and is trying to figure out what time they should get to the airport. It said 1.5 hours to 2 hours, depending on ABC things. Just by changing the role, if I said, this is your responsibility, this is who you are, it actually colors so much more of the work you're doing. So when you're thinking about building out some of these prompts, try to put that hat on and say, are you an event planner? Are you an association executive? Are you a hotel sales rep? Like, try to understand those roles, because you'd be surprised how well it actually does with kind of coloring the output that you get. The other thing is information. AI products do really well when you give it information in context about what you're trying to do. And the way I like to think about this, again, in the intern example, is their first day briefing, right? If you sit an intern down and say, hey, I need you to help me with this, and this task, how much context can you give them, right? Can you tell them about your organization? Can you tell them, what mistakes have been made before, things to keep an eye out for? That's a really big one. Prior templates you've used, your train of thought. The information section is the meat and potatoes of how you actually run a prompt. So make sure that you always include lots of context around that. The mission, the task, that's the actual, what do I want you to do? I like to think about this as the daily assignment. So now that the intern has their job title, they have their information, what they're supposed to be doing, tell them, what do I actually want you to do? So is it researching something specific around venue selection? Is it data analysis? And you want to be specific about what you're able to actually take on and how it's supposed to look. But I asterisk this because a lot of the advice that I got when I first started using AI was be as specific as possible, right? Don't give it any room to hallucinate or do stuff that's not going to work. If you're using it as a thought partner, right? And imagine, put yourself in the shoes, right? If you're working with a colleague or something, you say, hey, Trevor, working on this project, give me blue sky. Tell me what you think about this idea. But you can only think about it this way. You have to say it in less than 100 words, and you can only reference this one document. If you want to be creative and you give super tight context on how you're supposed to be creative, that's not going to work. So I want to flag that, because as much as you'll hear the narrative, be as specific as you want about AI. Yes, with data analysis, I don't want you getting too creative with the numbers. But with something like getting creative about venues, like site selection or things that might be more interesting, or solving a problem, right? That's another one, is here's how I'm thinking about it. But if I haven't thought about a solution you might actually suggest, I don't want to tell you this is the only way you can think about it. I want to get new ideas. So think outside the box on that as well. And the last thing is expectations. So again, this is where the kind of constraints part comes in. How do you want the formatting of that output to look? What do you want them to think about or not think about? Again, data, pretty important to have those kind of expectations in. But maybe, and you'll see this example that I'll run into with the demo, if I'm trying to look at, let's say I'm a hotel sales rep, and this is an example I'll jump into later, and I'm saying, well, I want to look at potential associations or nonprofits that can come to our venue. If I'm asking for associations and nonprofits that are in California, so it's the California Miners Association, they're never going to host an event in Virginia if they're a local state organization. So a constraint might be, well, actually only look at associations that are national. I don't want to look at regional ones or look at ones that might overlap with Virginia. So expectations and constraints can be a really helpful way to frame how you're actually, working with these types of products. So looking at the example prompt here, I'll kind of walk you through an example. If you're an AV professional, any AV professionals in the room today? Anyone who's an AV? I guess just the folks in the back. I'll give you an example of if you're an AV professional and you say, well, here's your role, here's what you're good at. I want you to intake an RFP, right? And this works the same if you're in hotels, right? You got a venue requirements doc, any of those kind of pieces. Actually help me to dissect it and what it's supposed to look like. So the information here, we're kind of looking at like, here's where the actual venue, where it's going to be hosted. I want to understand the dates of the conference. I want to understand the requirements and some more specific information. The mission might be, I've analyzed the RFP, identify what elements are missing. If any of y'all are on the supplier side, right, or even event planning and you have requests from your customers that come in, one of the challenges is that when you get an RFP or you get a request, do I have enough time to actually go through it line by line and really understand what might be missing, right? And I did this recently with an AV professional on our side of, we sent out an AV requirements doc. I didn't realize that there were certain questions that we didn't include in the AV requirements doc. But he told me and he said, well, if I had a bit more time, right, and I wasn't dealing with 10 other proposals, I could have maybe spotted some of that and asked you for it up front. These are areas, again, where AI can be quite helpful. An example, again, with the expectations, I don't want more than 7 follow-up questions, right? If you're a planner and your vendor comes back to you and says, here are a list of 35 questions you need to answer in order to answer this RFP, you're probably not going to respond. So you want to be specific about the expectations on that side as well. And think about iteration as well. So once you actually do some of these tasks, one of the questions I've been getting is, what are the follow-on tasks? Like, what else can I do once I get that analyzed RFP, or once I get the top venues that I could work on, for this? There are different ways to kind of think about this. I find scoring can be really fun. So if I say, give me 5 venues and here's my criteria, score them on a scale of 1 to 100 and give me a recommended option with your rationale. Like, that could be pretty interesting. I found logic trees can also be pretty interesting. So if you're saying, this kind of works more on the automation side. If the RFP has a budget that is smaller than this amount, then do this. If the budget is larger than this amount, then do that. So logic trees can be cool. And also reformatting, right? Maybe how many of y'all use like a CPQ tool, like with your company, to kind of upload, like if you want to do a quote, does your company already have like a system to create quotes? For your team. So if you have like a tool that like Proposify or any of these products where you're basically uploading information and then the company's helping you create the tool, the quote, that's a way where it says, well, this is what the quoting tool requires me to work with. So make sure you format your response according to that. All right, I think we want to switch over to some of the live demos and talk through actually how to use this live. So the example that I'm going to share is going through with ChatGPT, and we'll just zoom in a bit more here. And the example that I'm going to run through is exactly what I just mentioned. So if you are a supplier or you have a product or service, how can you create a library with that content? How can you actually compare your input of the RFP to like what you need to put together for a quote? And then how can you actually prepare options for your client? So the example that I'm going to be running through is I'm an AV professional. Someone came to me with a requirements doc that says, I need to have this venue. I need you to have AV set up for this kind of use case, and go everything from analyzing the RFP all the way into creating the quote and then actually sending it back to me of what you need to be able to do. So I'll talk through a couple things here. First off, what are you actually uploading? If you've seen this projects feature, it's a tab that you'll kind of see in the sidebar for ChatGPT. You'll see the same thing with Claude or other tools. You want to be able to upload files. So if you click into files, you can kind of add different files that are relevant. Yes, go ahead. Yeah, sure. Sorry about that. Here. Is that better? Yeah, very good call. Yeah, so you want to be able to upload files to your the prompt you're trying to be doing. So here's some of the examples, right? Like here's a sample RFP with anonymized data of a conference where this is what I uploaded. So I actually gave it the RFP of saying like, here's the dates, here's what we included, the breakdown, the staffing requirements. That's one thing. I also uploaded a cheat sheet. So if you're an event planner and you have ways of thinking about packaging your services. You might want to upload that to the project to actually get some context. If you're a hotel and you have ways of thinking about, you have a room rate or you have a different ballroom pricing, et cetera, you might want to upload that. So what I actually created with this is a cheat sheet of saying, well, if you're looking at breakout rooms, here's typically how we service them as an AV professional. If you're doing ballroom packages, here's how you do it. If it's hybrid streaming, you need cameras, PTZ, et cetera, this is how to think about it. So you want to create, I've created a cheat sheet as well to work with that. And the other thing is, and I'll zoom in a bit more here too. Can everyone see that, or should I make it a little big? Yeah, better. Yeah, so here's an example of like an AV catalog, right, that I've created and then uploaded. So I've actually said, like, here's all the different equipment that we have. Here's our like cost of labor that we have. So again, if you're in a position as a supplier where you have your default list rates, you know how much everything costs, and you have a standard system, you always mark it up by 25%. That's something where you can upload your catalog to this tool so that it actually has context on what you tend to work on. So that's pretty much what I've uploaded here. You can see that I've uploaded the example of the RFP. I've uploaded the cheat sheet and like a dummy catalog. And the example I'll run through here is specifically around the framework that I just shared, right? So the role is, you're my internal quoting assistant for conference AV. The information, I've said, like, I've attached the full RFP for this test event at a sample hotel. The mission, and I'm telling it, I want you to read the RFP and give me, specific information. I'm going to tell you how to format it. I'll preface before I jump too far into this. Some of this might feel like it's a lot of work up front, but how many of you all use standard operating procedures? SOPs, sure, yeah, or template. If you create something once and you reuse it with your team, it's worth the effort. So this is an example of, it might take a bit of time in the first rep to actually get it what you want to do, but when you do it the 50th time, it's a lot easier. So here's an example. Again, this is what I want you to do. Expectations, I want you to pull the audience size if they're including ceiling height. I want to make sure you can keep the entries concise. If details are missing, here's how I end up thinking about it. So that's kind of how I framed out the actual prompt and what I'm going to run through. Before I hit enter, projects also have something called instructions. And that's where you can tell the AI how to think about this space of tasks that you're working on. So I mentioned this is not a one-off prompt. This is actually part of like a project that I'm working on that I've called the AV Sales Assistant. So you can actually input instructions to tell ChatGPT, Claude, Copilot, how to think about that specific project you're working on. So, and I'll again, this is in the guide, so don't get too overwhelmed. I can share it with you after. But it gets pretty built out, right? I'm telling it, here's the hierarchy of how to actually create this. Here's how to think about multi-room versus individual room use. Here's how to handle budget. It's frustrating, obviously, on the supplier side, if you get an RFP that says, I don't know what the budget is, just give me your input. So if there is no budget, how do you think about that? How do you actually challenge it? Unique requirements, right? If they ask for streaming, how do you think about that? How to think about pricing. I gave some examples here to the instructions. Equipment scaling. Again, I know we're not a lot of AV professionals, so I won't spend too much time on the specifics here, but really trying to give it pretty detailed instructions. The same way, again, if I onboard an intern as a sales rep tomorrow and said, I need you to use this template and create a quote for this client that's coming in, I need to give that person context on how we usually think about it and how to actually get them as dialed in as possible. So that's an example of, again, the project instructions that I've kind of built out. And even the email, right? If you're writing an email with AI and you're trying to figure out how do you build it out well, I've given it examples of like, here's how I want you to talk. Here's how to keep it under X words. I don't want this massive behemoth of an email that they're going to forget. If you're going to summarize pricing options in the email, here's how to do it. So this is potentially overkill in terms of how much I've actually put into this. But this also wasn't my first try. My first try was a lot simpler than this. And then as I started to see what the results are, I would actually ask the AI, well, is this because my prompt wasn't good, or is this because my project instructions wasn't good enough? And getting that feedback of, well, here's how to change your, this is the beauty of some of these tools, right? It's not just saying, this is not working, I don't try to fix it. You can actually go back and forth and say, here's why this is not working, or give me ideas on how to fix it, or where should I fix it? You could even, again, in the example of working with a client, right? If you're working with an event-specific person on an association team, and you're having some issues getting the right response from an AI, maybe you want to say, well, you're now the executive director of the association. Here's what your event specialist told me, and here's why I'm frustrated. How would you change the initial prompt to try to get there? So the beauty of kind of bouncing between different types of prompts and different types of roles is what I find fascinating about the ecosystem, is I can actually get better at my job and how I think about some of these problems, all within this kind of back and forth ecosystem of AI. So that's an example, again, of the system that I've set up here and the outputs, and what it actually would look like. So if I attach the RFP, and I want to be mindful of time, but it'll give you an example of, if you actually start doing it, it's going to read through the documents. What I love about some of these products is they actually tell you what their thought process is. So I could see where it's saying, it wants me to do this, but that seems contradictory to this, right? Or, oh, well, like it's asking for this, but this information is missing. That if you could actually see it kind of think through the process of how it's analyzing this. And I have a finished version as well here. Just one second. Go back to the AV. Go. I'll pull this one up just so you can see what the actual end result one is. One second. Scroll to the top here. So after it says it's been thinking for X number of minutes and doing it, you can actually see the detailed thought process, right? So after you've done the prompt, you can actually see, here's how it thought through everything. It was saying, well, here's what I need to do. Actually, I think it's a better idea to look at this document without looking at certain parameters, or bouncing around that side. So it actually walks you through the specifics of how it's thinking about this stuff. And again, this might take a minute or two to actually fully process. But the output that I get at the bottom here is a pretty organized needs table. If you looked at my original RFP, right, that had a bunch of different information, I had repeated lines, it actually organized it in terms of saying, here's what the room looks like, here's what we need for tech notes, and the gaps and questions. I know in my original RFP I uploaded, I didn't include anything about ceiling height, I didn't include stage height, I didn't say anything about like what type of requirements we need. So there's actually gaps and questions that it'll flag for me from the RFP. And at the bottom here, it'll tell me as well, like for each specific task, what that's supposed to look like. So I wanted to be mindful of internet to get this out. But I'll move on to the next one. So once you have that RFP analyzed, right, which actually says here's what you're supposed to be doing, the next thing I'm saying is, well, I want you to actually help me to think about this quote. How can you put it together for me? And remember, I gave it the AV catalog, I gave it all the information already. So what I'm saying is now, I want you to produce this quote based on the requirements that I've sent out. Here's how I want you to structure it. And you saw, I want it to be room. Well, however you structure your sales quotes, you can tell them to do that. I'm giving it specific information of saying, here's what I want you to list. Some companies, and again, this is similar if you're a hotel, if you're AV professional, you might want to list all the line items with their individual prices, right? That's something you want to do for transparency. Other organizations might actually say, well, when we do that, they start picking and saying, well, can we change this to this price? Oh, well, why is the breakout room so expensive? Can we change the breakout room around, opposed to saying this is your ballroom package? So you can actually tell it again, here's how I want to organize this quote so that it's organized the way that I'm expected to. And after they actually create that assumptions doc, I've asked it to give me like a quick summary at the bottom of things I need to give input on. So when you've created the quote, and again, this is the same thing as an intern, when they've built that quote out for you and they come back to you, and again, I remember 10 years ago, I came and I was like, I'm so excited to show you what I just created. And my boss must be thinking, I'm gonna rip this apart because it's probably gonna be terrible. That's an example of, actually tell me what you were unsure about when you were creating this. So a really common one in AV, and again, in other areas as well, is, well, how many hours do we have for these specific times? Like this is usually what we do for setup and tear down, but maybe it's changing. Maybe your hotel is saying you only have a 3-hour window the day before. You don't have 8 hours. So why would I quote 8 hours for a AV professional to come in? So it'll actually tell me the specific, here's the example of like the actual run through and the download link. But it'll tell me the assumptions, right? It says, hey, your ceiling height is TBD. That actually affects what we're able to put in for pipe and drape and different options. We're not sure about the rehearsal time. You didn't give us a time for setup. You just said setup is April 3rd. You didn't say what specific time. Question of like operator sharing, right? And you must see this if y'all are in hotels. you have a room, you have a divider in the middle, the next day the room becomes one big room. How do I deal with that if I'm an AV professional? This is an example of like that back and forth. And then, some other questions like, once you actually answer this, I can give you the final list. So the output that I got here first was, and I'll zoom in here, and I'm gonna full screen this. Can everyone see that? Yep. So here's an example of what I got, right? I got the specific room, and this is all kind of processed by the AI. Gave me the what specific product we're doing, how many days, the actual pricing. There were some questions that kind of popped up, I think specifically around like the assumptions that it was trying to create, but it gave me this fairly itemized, and again, you can customize this to however you have your company and setup done, but it gave me this list of an initial quote. When I summed the list price, it came out to 112,000. And for the conference we were looking at, I was saying, well, our budget is like 60,000. How are we going to afford right? And this is, again, a prime problem, right? If you're just putting this, if you're using your own tool, you're not using AI, and you're just inputting all the information, and you spit out this quote, and you send it to a planner, and they're just like, this is way bigger than I expected. I'm not even going to entertain your questions. I don't want to talk. So that's an example of, okay, this was good. It hit all the expectations, but the budget was ridiculous. I can't bring this back to my team. So the follow-up that I had here, right, is I said, okay, our first module, this you said is about 112K. We're way above the ceiling that we need. Now, I want to emphasize this. This is where your experience as an event professional is super powerful. Only you will know, hey, if the quote is way bigger, here's how I want you to adjust it. Don't just use willy-nilly ideas of how to do it. Here's how I want to adjust it. So I gave an example here of, hey, if you're an AV professional, use different lower brightness screens, right? You can still use big projectors, but maybe go with 4K instead of 16K or whatever they might have gone with initially. Maybe you want to remove duplicate screens. Maybe we can have shared text, right? I know how many of y'all, if your planners use roaming text, right? You have 3 breakout rooms, same tech kind of roams between the 3 of them. That's an example of maybe an edit that we could make to actually make this a more palatable quote. So I gave it some examples. I didn't just say, this quote's too big, give me a lower quote. Because the first time I did that, it said, well, what we can do is swap out the projectors with screens. We'll just give you TVs. So I was like, that's not going to work for a conference. So that's a prime example if you have to kind of prime it, to think that way. So here's an example, right? It gave me the new quote, and I have the other quote here. It gave me, again, the same assumptions and information. Total list price was 58K, so way better. And the same things had changed, right? It said, here's how we're going to adjust this to be a good fit for us. Being mindful of time, I'll just skip over to the actual, now I have the base quote of 60K. Sometimes as an event planner or supplier, you want to provide different options. So I asked the AI, I said, well, can you give me an enhanced quote? Give me a quote that's about 20% higher that offers some different things. And if you're in hotels, you could say, well, we can give you this full room. We can add on, our reception room if you need. There's flexibility around that. So I gave it that input. And the output, again, was quite strong. It came back and said, well, here's your option B. That's 70K instead of 58. We've added ABC areas and extra roaming tech. We've added certain things. And then the final thing I did here was I actually asked, well, now give me an email I can send back to the client once I have this quote prepared. And I told it how I wanted to kind of frame it. And then it gave me, a pretty awesome response quote that I can include in a table. It actually used our product positioning, right? So if you're a hotel and your benefit is the flexibility you offer with your room rates or something, I've included that. I said we're a nationwide AV chain, so that's why we have local providers anywhere you go. That makes it cheaper. And I've kind of maybe asked, questions, assumptions that are kind of going through, and quote's valid until then. So this is just an example, and again, this is all in the guide, so you can see the individual prompts and how I've kind of thought through it, but an example of something that seems very complex. And if you look at the guide, I always put initial prompt. So I say hey, here's an RFP, create a quote. I try to make it very simple, and the initial response is usually way off. And it's very easy at that point to just say, I'll do it myself, right? Like an intern. If my intern comes back and says, hey, I worked so hard on this, and I said, it took you 12 hours? This is awful, right? If that's your response, I might just say, oh, it'll take me 30 minutes. Let me just do it myself. If you challenge yourself and actually try to think about how can I spar with the AI and get to that good output, that's where you can improve it to a point where it's something you can actually rely on consistently. So I'll jump back into my slide here. I have a guide that I'll share afterwards with a QR code that has not just the use case I just shared, but also a lot for planners. I built the session back at WC for planners. So examples of like how to create an event timeline, how to compare rooming lists. You have a rooming list, you have your registration data. How do you compare those back and forth? Moderator guide. I actually ran a webinar for my alma mater on what's called panelists. And I was short on time. And I said, well, I have these folks and I have their LinkedIn profiles. Can you help me to ask really good questions? Like, I don't just want standard questions, like be creative about this. And it did a really impressive job of like, hey, did you know that Samir did his PhD in this area and here's how he did it. And here's like, it was really cool how it kind of came up with that. So there's a lot of other use cases that I'll share. This is just an idea of like where you can use it. If you need ideas of where to think about where you can use it in events, budgeting, RFPs, session development, I kind of have the spectrum of like transactional to more thinking thought partner type stuff. So you could see like reconciliation. Again, I don't want you to get too creative if you're reconciling our events budget. But maybe if you're thinking about team communication or session development, you want to get more creative. So that kind of spectrum, right? Put that thought partner hat on, put that transactional hat on, and try to think, how do I want AI to interact with me and what's the goal of this task? Because it will look different in terms of how you actually structure things. So your first 5 minutes, let's say you're getting back and you're like, okay, I got this awesome information from Trevor. He spoke really quickly. It was kind of overwhelming. But I have a lot of cool stuff I want to use. How do I actually implement these ideas? Now, here's a guide that I'll tell you to do with your team when you get back on Monday. Take the guide that I'll share with you. Make a list of 3 tasks that you do repeatedly. It doesn't matter what specifically it is, but pick those 3 tasks. Pick one that, from what you learned today, you think is most similar. And this is what I was impressed when I talked to some folks after my WC session. They said, Trevor, I had this specific use case with my company that you didn't mention in your presentation, but it looked similar to the rooming list one. So I used that approach and it actually worked really well. So think about your 3 tasks, pick one, and try to compare it to what you learned today and see if you could actually write it out. Number 3 is so important. Ask a member of your team to do it with you. If you do it by yourself and you're kind of in this echo chamber, if that's your only option, I encourage you to do it. I'm happy to be your sparring partner. But if not, use someone else on your team to learn it with you. Because anytime you're learning a new skill and you have someone else who's learning it differently, you might be fascinated on like how they approach the problem, right? How do they actually intake this? It's a learning opportunity to see how someone else might tackle this problem, what they got frustrated with where you didn't get frustrated, right? These are all little things that when you're thinking about tool adoption, right? You're using registration software or using a CRM system. These are little things that will pop up that might irk certain people versus others. Doing it with a colleague or a friend can make that a lot easier. So again, run those prompts and then actually compare it with your colleague to see where they're at. And the last thing I would ask you to do is at the bottom of that task in your chat, right, whether it's Copilot or Claude or Gemini, whatever, say, well, give it your honest opinion. Say, hey, ChatGPT, this is what you came out with. It was great. This took 36 minutes to get to and several prompts to get to. What would you have changed about my original prompt to make this easier next time? What would you change about my project instructions that would make it easier next time? What could I have uploaded, right? Again, blue sky, we're not being specific here. What could I have given you information-wise that would make this easier for you to do? Is there a better person that could have done this? I told you you're an AV coding professional. Should I have told you you're a seasoned AV? Again, these are all things that you might want to ask the product to do, because then you get that output you can then iterate on the next time, right? And it's that 1%, 2% better idea, but usually it's exponential. The first time you do it, it might be 20 to 40% better. The second time it gets a little better. So I always like to do this because it helps you to kind of prime how you're thinking about the task and get better over time. And imagine if everyone on your team is doing this, right? If everyone on your team is taking those tasks and asking how can I get better? It's the same as management, right? If everyone on your team is saying, how can I get better every day? Your team's going to be way faster to grow and develop, and AI adoption is no different. It's not just work. I want to emphasize that. And I've given some examples here in the guide of the more you practice AI like a language, you will get better at using it. The examples I've shared in the guide, I have a Century home with my fiance, and we had an ants problem in the backyard, right? Ants were coming along the fence. I was flipping out. How do I deal with this? I used it to try to figure out what is the cause of this problem, right? We wanted to get I was on the phone with Chrysler because my van was breaking down. And I went and took it in, and he said, hey, Trevor, so we're fixing this and this. Also, it's going to cost you another $800 to do this emission switch fix. I used ChatGPT to say, well, what is this? How critical is this? Can I call you back? And I ended up saying, well, actually, you fixed the mission critical things. I don't need you to do this extra fix. I'm not a mechanic, but that's a prime example, personal use case of ways you can use it. So the more you use it, the more you get comfortable with using these tools, the better that you will be at using it in your work. Just like the more you practice a language, the better you're going to use it in a professional environment. If you want to scan this as well, we have a form for my session this afternoon with Jessica, who's been a pleasure coming out from Repository event to show us about how to use AI in like a hands-on session. So this afternoon, we're going to have your laptops out. We're going to actually do some case studies together and you put some of this information into practice. So if you want to scan that and basically input some of the questions you might have, that'd be super helpful so that we can factor it in. The other thing I want to share is I have a guide. So this is actually the older guide, but I just wanted to give you a quick example of how it's kind of structured. It has all the information that we talked about today and more because I couldn't fit it into this presentation. So I'd encourage you to actually scan this, and if you can't find it, come up to me after, and I'm happy to send it out to you. And I think we can maybe coordinate sending it out to the group. But this is a PDF guide that has all the information we talked about today, all the use cases, templates, how to think about the tool comparison. So if you want something, again, practical that you can take back to your team and you can say, I had this awesome session on AI, let's print this out and take it to the meeting on Monday and let's actually go through it together or figure out how we can use it. This is a prime example of a way to actually implement that. So would love your feedback if you have any thoughts on those work. Awesome. That's everything on my end. Thank you so much for the opportunity and to kind of share with my experience with you all today. I don't know if we have time for any Q&A or, yeah, if anyone has any questions, I think we got a couple more minutes, so happy to take some questions on this topic. And yeah, go for it. Yeah, great. So great question. So I'll switch back to the products here. There's a feature that you should toggle off on your settings if you're using ChatGPT and certain products around data controls. So I have improved the model for everyone turned off. So when the minute you get a paid plan, and if you're on a free plan, it's a good question. If you're on a free plan of ChatGPT or those products, that data is open, right? That's not your environment. When you start paying for it, like you're getting ChatGPT or those products, you pay for it, you can turn this off. If you're on products like Gemini or Copilot, Microsoft actually has like an enterprise data license if you have like a Microsoft business plan that protects you within your environment. So the information is secure as long as you're typically on a paid plan, which again, for Copilot could be $30 a month, $20 a month for ChatGPT. So it's a really good question. With that being said, I mentioned this in the guide, talk to your team and your IT department about this. Like they'll say they're not gonna use your data, and I trust that, but at the same time, I actually make an effort to anonymize data. So what I'll do is if I'm uploading an attendee registration list, I'll create like an ID for everybody, and then I'll upload it without their personal information. And then once I have it built out, then I'll bring it back and compare it. So I think there's some creative ways to kind of work around the data policy if you really don't want to put anything sensitive into it. But yeah, really good question. I think usually if you have the paid plan, you can turn off that data sharing. And certain products, I believe, like Claude, doesn't share any of your data, regardless. There's no testing that's happened to it. But yeah, it's a really good question. Yes, go for it. So I work a lot in the political realm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so you can have it. It has the search the web function in most of these tools recently, so it's able to look at specific links. The example I have in the guide that I shared is I looked at like the Nuclear Energy Association and like a panel they were running, and how can you what questions could you ask based on their profiles. So it actually said, well, there's the Advance Act that was just passed, and here's information on it, and here's how to. And again, I don't know anything about nuclear energy, so the fact that it came up with that, was able to tackle it, was pretty impressive. But yeah, that's a great example of it can be pretty on top of what's happening by searching the web and pulling that information in. And you can put constraints on it as well. It's like, here's the typical demographic of our attendees. How should I think about framing this question so that it makes sense? But yeah, really good question. Awesome. Well, with that, thank you so much. Look forward to seeing you all today and appreciate the opportunity. All right. Thank you so much.
much, Trevor. We've learned so much
I'll leave
this
this
morning.
here. Oh, gosh.
Different chapter.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Absolutely.